All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today, and welcome to Introduction to the Animal-Free Wool Prize with PETA, Stella McCartney, and Stray Dog Capital. My name is Allison Irvine. I am the Program Manager of the Biodesign Challenge.
And I'm Dan Grushkin. I'm the Director of the program and the founder. And this is Vina.
Hello. Hi everyone. I wanted to welcome you to this webinar today, along with Allison and Dan. We're really excited to have all of the representatives here to talk about the PETA Wool Prize. As you all know, this is a part of a series of webinars that is a resource for the instructors and the students that are participating in this year's Biodesign Challenge. So just a reminder, we do have one more webinar that is coming up in March. We will be sending you more information about that in upcoming newsletters. So without further ado, Dan?
So I just want to welcome Stephanie and Laura and Lisa and Claire. Thank you all for doing this. This is really a first for us, and we're really excited about it. Before we get started, I'm just going to give the audience a little breakdown of what's going to happen. So Alice and I will introduce Stephanie, who will then introduce our other speakers. While the speakers are speaking, the rest of us will go on mute, and our little icons, our little webcams will go off. So you'll see one speaker. Also, while the speaker is speaking, feel free to use the chat window to ask for questions. At the end of all the speakers, we'll address all of those questions one by one. So if you're thinking of something and you want to just get it down, put it in the chat, and we'll answer the question at the end of the session. And so with that...
Yes, welcome Stephanie, Laura, Lisa, and Claire, and I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Downs to begin. So welcome,
Great.
Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Allison and crew. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and welcome to all the students. I can't tell you how excited that we all are to have you guys participating and your interest in the Animal-Free Wool Challenge. So we're going to give you a little background today about why we're doing this and the opportunities and interest out there for these types of materials. So real quick, I'm Stephanie Downs. I've been doing corporate affairs work for PETA for over a decade now. Where I've been reaching out to corporations and helping them to make change for the betterment of animals. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the demand in the industry today for these types of topics. And Laura, if you could tell us briefly about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Laura Shields, and I'm a corporate liaison in PETA's Corporate Affairs Department. So I work primarily with companies to get them to move away from the cruel animal skin industries, and I'm going to talk about the wool industry today.
Wonderful. And how about you, Lisa?
Hi everybody, I am really glad to be with you here today. My name is Lisa Feria and I'm an investor. So I lead a venture capital firm called Stray Dog Capital, and Stray Dog's thesis is to invest in products that take animals out of the supply chain. So we have over 26 companies that we've invested in and fantastic entrepreneurs who have figured out a way to bring incredible game-changing products into the market that will replace the need of animals. So I'm really excited to talk to you more today.
And last but certainly not least, bringing up the tail here, Claire, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Hi everyone. So first of all, I apologize if my voice comes in and out. I'm fighting off a cold. But my name is Claire Bergkamp. I head up sustainability and innovation at Stella McCartney. I have been at Stella for about 6 years. Doing a lot of the work and leading a lot of the work around supply chain transparency, ethical and sustainable supply chains, and most excitingly about this, looking at new materials, alternatives, exciting future of fibers and materials. So I'm excited to talk to everyone today about what it is that a company needs for wool, why we would want wool in the first place, and how we think that the future can be completely different when it comes to fibers, looking at
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Claire. We have such a great group today and a great group sponsoring this challenge. So we're really hoping the students are going to get a lot out of this. And with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Laura with PETA, who is going to talk about the challenge and in particular why there's such a need for what we're doing here with you all. So Laura, with that, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you. So when we talk about the wool industry, it's important to remember that sheep are gentle, sensitive, intelligent animals. And what happens to the sheep in the wool industry would be illegal if it happened to a dog or a cat. So what I'm going to talk about today is what we find every single every single time we go into a farm, a slaughterhouse, or a shearing shed. And I'm going to go over what we see again and again. So PETA has released 7 exposés of 44 sheep operations across 3 continents, including in Argentina, Australia, Chile, and in the US, Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and Utah. And in every single run, we find that sheep are routinely mutilated and abused, including for supposedly sustainable wool or responsibly sourced wool. Now, the cruelty documented at these operations is not unique, nor is it the actions of a few bad apples. This is systemic cruelty that's entrenched in the wool industry. The shearing process is a violent and bloody process. Shearers are paid by the volume and not the hour, and so that encourages very fast, violent work of the sheep, or fast, violent work shearing the sheep, and that frequently leads to severe injuries on the sheep's bodies. Now, many sheep's bodies are ripped or torn open by the electric clippers, and then the workers will take a needle and thread and ram that needle through the sheep's sensitive skin in an attempt to sew up those gaping bloody wounds, or they'll just leave the animals to suffer. We've documented frustrated workers punching sheep in the face, kicking and stomping on them, standing on their heads and necks, and beating them in the face with the sharp metal clippers. This type of abuse is chronic in the wool industry. Now, sheep endure painful mutilations, like having their tails cut off, or castration, or having holes punched through their ears, often with no pain relief. And it's standard practice for farmers to engage in a gruesome procedure called mulesing, where they'll take a huge chunk of flesh on either side of the sheep's backside and slice it off. And they do this because it leaves then scarred skin tissue where no hair will grow. And that's an effort to keep flies from laying eggs in the wet, wrinkly skin folds. And that's what you can see in that bottom right-hand picture, is those sheep that have gone through that procedure. Now, sheep go through the bloody shearing ritual over and over again until they're no longer producing enough wool to be useful. And when that happens, they die a painful death, either having their throats slit on the farm, or they're loaded onto trucks and transported in all weather extremes to slaughterhouses. In the cold, many sheep will freeze to the side of the trucks, or in the warmer weather, many sheep will collapse from heat. And of course, when you get to the slaughterhouse, the sheep are strung up and dismembered. Now, most people don't know this, but every year millions of sheep are loaded onto filthy, multi-tiered ships, and they're sent to North Africa or the Middle East. And the sheep will stand in their own waste for weeks on end, and many die from the crowded conditions of disease, starvation, or thirst. And those who do survive the journey are then often dragged from the ship by their ears, their tails, and their legs, and have their throats slit right there on the dock while they're still conscious. Now, not only is wool bad for animals, clearly, it's devastating for the environment. Animal agriculture accounts for 51% of total greenhouse gas emissions, and that's more than all the transportation in the world combined. So animal agriculture and its co-products like wool are the single most destructive industry to the earth. And sheep are ruminant animals, and that means that they generate methane, which is a greenhouse gas that's 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And wool is it's not sustainable. The sheep also require energy-intensive feed with large amounts of chemical-laden fertilizer, and they generate massive amounts of manure, which of course pollutes the land, the water, the air. And data from the Higgs Material Sustainability Index found that because of the greenhouse gas emissions created in its production, wool has a more significant impact on global warming than the majority of its synthetic counterparts. Wool also plays a big role in eutrophication, which is a serious ecological problem in which runoff waste creates an overgrowth of plant life in water systems, and that kills animals because it suffocates them by depleting the water or the oxygen levels in the water, and it's the leading cause of dead zones. So, given all of this, because people are becoming aware of the animal cruelty and the environmental devastation that's inherent in the animal skin industries, there's a rise in consumer demand for cruelty-free items. People are starting to pay attention to where their clothes are made and where they come from, and definitely the global impact of those items. And Stephanie's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Laura. And actually, it was interesting. Haven't had a chance to share the story with you, but recently I was in Australia and went on a tour of something different. But while I was there was a place next door that was doing shearing, and so I decided, and this was for the public, and so I decided to step over and just take a look. I was curious to see how the process would work, especially. I mean, they actually had like a kind of an auditorium of, a small auditorium, probably 100 people watching how the process worked. And even in a situation where they knew they were being watched and videotaped and everything, I went and checked the sheep afterwards, and each of the sheep used in the demonstration had at least 5 large gashes on their body. And so I was really surprised by that, and I would have expected it to be really under their best behavior, with all those people watching. So it was interesting to see it firsthand. And for the students out there, I know it's not always easy to hear about the cruelty and the reality of what's happening, but we wanted to help you understand that right up front. It's important to know by doing what you're doing, and if you decide to focus on this challenge this semester and you come up with something amazing, that you could really make a difference in the lives of hundreds of millions of animals. And so we wanted to understand what you could step up and help with and talk about. So, and as Laura also mentioned, the environmental impact is enormous too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the demand because as you know, there's a lot going on in the world with consumers and people demanding products that are more ethical and sustainable. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the trends that we're seeing and how you guys can be a part of it. So first of all, there's a growing awareness with corporations. Laura and I both have done a lot of work with corporations on making positive change for animals, and just have a few examples listed here for you. As there's hundreds of companies, most recently ones like Michael Kors, Jimmy Choo, Gucci, and others that have banned fur. So fur is a big issue. So there's all kinds of different issues within the fashion industry, and fur is something that many of you have probably heard about, and many companies, even big name designers, have banned it. Of course, including Stella McCartney that's joined us today, and also over 300 companies have banned Angora, which, in case you're not familiar with what this is, Angora wool. It's used as a wool in sweaters. Has a little bit of a fur feeling to it. It's rabbit fur is what it is, and over 300 companies in just the last couple of years have banned that because of the cruelty that's involved in that process. Also, companies have been stepping up to ban exotic skins, which is alligator, crocodile, snake, and because of, again, undercover investigations that have been done about this cruelty. And there's also countless companies that have banned leather, and many that don't use it. In case you haven't heard, like one wonderful example for us recently is that Tesla has recently made all of the interiors for their cars vegan leather, and they're no longer using regular leather. And because the developments in this area are just so amazing, and we really feel that wool is the next frontier. It's not something that has been taken on yet, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's really what's happening next. And the companies are going toward this because they're seeing the demand out there. You all, of course, fall into these categories. I'm not sure that any of the rest of us do on this call, but the millennials and the Gen Zs out there are the up-and-coming consumers. They're who you certainly will be selling to as you head into the world. And there's an increasing demand from these groups for vegan goods and ethical products, because sustainability resonates with the next generation of consumers, and they want and they're going to represent, the largest consumer base in history, it's predicted, and they're socially and eco-conscious. Millennials, for example, 12% of people between the ages of 18 to 29 are vegetarian or vegan, which is an enormous jump. In my generation, it was 5%. So it's a huge jump in one generation. And also, 89% of millennials have a strong likelihood to buy from companies that support socially produced goods. And Gen Z, they anticipate that 40% of all consumers by 2020, they'll be looking for products that are considered to be ethically raised. So, it's an enormous opportunity out there to reach these consumers. And, again, we do feel that wool is the next big thing. Celebrities are beginning to get behind it. Companies like Stella McCartney, who's always on the forefront, are actively looking for a solution in this area. And so because of this cruelty and the growing demand, across the industry of fashion, we're seeing scientists and designers continue to develop innovative materials that take animal cruelty and environmental devastation out of the equation. And they're just looking for more innovative ways to do things. And we're hoping to lean on you guys this semester to see what creative things you can come up with around wool. So just some examples I wanted to show you of people who are inventing things out there. If you were to go and go shopping today, chances are at many stores you would find different types of faux suedes and faux leather. So we're seeing a lot of that coming, and it's being made from all kinds of different materials, from some of it's recycled plastic, and so on. It's really amazing what we're seeing people coming up with. But faux suede and faux leather are becoming more common. And then also we're seeing people begin to biofabricate leather, meaning making it in the lab. There's a company named Modern Meadow that is doing some really interesting things around growing actual leather in a lab. And there's also people out there. I recently spoke to a gentleman who is looking at 3D printing exotic skins like crocodile and alligator, because it's very complicated to grow that, but he believes he could 3D print it. So there's interesting things going around in biofabricate for leather. Also, we have people using natural materials, and Claire will talk a little bit more later about the different types of materials that are out there, but one is considered natural plant-based. So things like cork, we're seeing people making leather out of cork. Also, pineapple leather is an interesting one. There's a company named PETA that is using pineapple leaves and turning them into leather. And then also we're seeing so many fascinating things being used around mushrooms, and this is everything from fashion to even food. I recently spoke to someone who's going to be growing mushrooms in incubators to make pet food. And then here we have a company that is using mushrooms to make leather. So mushrooms is a really versatile plant that we're seeing a lot of people do interesting things around. If you were to look into biofabricate for materials, chances are some things would come up about what's being done around silk. And there's companies like Spiber and Bolt Threads that are doing some really amazing things with spider silk, which they're again growing in a lab. And actually the CEO of Bolt Threads, which is a very hot tech company out in San Francisco right now, he's actually agreed to be an advisor on the challenge. So he'll be participating, and is very excited to see what you guys can do. And then, of course, there are people who have come up with wool alternatives. If you walked in now to an H&M or various Macy's or other different places, chances are you would find some products that look like wool. They have that feel, but that say that they're made out of synthetic, be it polyester, other materials, and Claire will get into those details. But the challenge that we've ran into, which again Claire will talk about more too, is the materials that are there, they just don't quite provide all the characteristics that wool does, and that's been the biggest challenge. Is companies like Stella McCartney and others need a material that looks and feels and behaves like wool and provides the characteristics, and that's been the challenge. Is companies are happy to use these replacements, but it needs to provide what they need. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lisa, who's going to talk to you guys a little bit about the world that she works in and the opportunities that she's seeing out there for people getting into this space. So Lisa, I'll let you take it.
Stephanie. All right, so I think the opportunity is huge, not only because there are so many things and so many products that could be developed into an alternative product, but also because there's a huge group of investors who are interested in this space, who are working and investing in this space. So for example, for us, I'm with Stray Dog Capital, but this is just a very small group of investors who I routinely invest with and investing in a lot of the companies that we'll see here on the next slide, because we believe that there's a huge opportunity, a huge market opportunity, a huge consumer opportunity to develop different products. And I will point out specifically Glasswell Syndicate. It's a syndicate of investors who all have gotten together and collaborate because we all invest in this space. And we have over 100 investors in that syndicate alone. So there is not only consumer demand, but there's investor demand. There are people like us at Stray Dog Capital who are interested in partnering with people like you to bring these products to market. So these are some of the companies, and actually Stray Dog Capital has invested in the majority of them, but these are companies that have addressed a problem and a opportunity and done it in incredibly innovative ways. And I want to pick up the thread that Stephanie laid down with the mushroom leather. I actually met with a company who was producing mushroom leather, and somebody in the group asked them, well, how is this going to be like leather? And they said, it's not like leather, it's better than leather. We don't want to have the limitations of current leather. We want to bring you everything that leather provides to you, and water resistance, and all these other things. And I thought it was such a nice way to think about the opportunity. It's not only saying here's a replacement of the current product, because that product has issues and defects on its own. It's how do we make it even better than what we have? So it's a no-brainer for anybody that would choose the wool product versus this new product. So Stephanie mentioned both threads, and if you get to talk to the CEO, I would ask him how he started out with Florida-based spiders that were the size of a dinner plate, and then from there synthesized the products all the way to making what they have now. But each one of these companies in their fields have taken a current product and said, how do I make this differently, better, and how do I think about this problem in a completely out-of-the-box way? So I'm really excited to see what you are gonna bring to the table, because we as investors are looking for opportunities to partner with you.
Great, that's wonderful, Lisa. And also, so everybody knows, Lisa will also be coming to the event in New York City, and she's very excited to sit down and talk with some of you guys, and it'll be a really good opportunity. So Lisa, can you tell me, do you guys get involved in like incubating, like if somebody just has an idea but they're still a little bit fresh? And I know that sometimes there's some opportunities available in the industry, and I know from my personal experience that you guys, as I should say to the people on the phone, that I've been involved in a social enterprise startup that's worked with companies like Stray Dog, and they're also there for a lot of just support, and mentoring and advice on, because this is not just for people like Lisa and this industry, it's not just about making money. It's not about just looking for that opportunity where they can make the most out of their investment. They're looking at changing the world, and they're looking to partner up with people. But I was just curious, do you guys work with people when they're in those very much infancy stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why I said partnership as opposed to investment, because at this early stage, it typically is a partnership. We partner with you because the questions that you're going to have at different stages will vary. And as you grow into different parts of the business, you will have completely new challenges. And so we are able to provide not only financial capital, but also connections, networks, expertise, mentorship, etc. As an example, when we invested in Memphis Meats, who is a cellular agriculture company, they didn't have anything. They just had an idea and a really great team. And we were able to see the opportunity and partner with them at a very, very, very early stage.
Wonderful.
So it's definitely a full-on partnership.
Yeah, they're definitely a great example of somebody who went from just being an idea to just being an amazing situation. So, well, thank you so much, Lisa. And now we're going to bring Claire in here to talk a little bit about some of the specifications of what a real customer out there would be looking for, and why it's been a challenge for a company like Stella to move away completely from wool because it's not really any great replacements out there, and how much we need this in the industry. So with that, Claire, I'll hand it to you.
Great. Thanks. So just to kind of give a bit of background, a bit of context setting about the types of fibers that we use in fashion. I'm sure many of you already know this, but if we wanted to classify, we would classify fibers into natural fibers from animals, natural fibers from plants, and synthetic fibers. So within that, I'll talk a little bit about each one of those categories, but to start by explaining a little bit about wool. So there's two types of wool that we use in fashion: worsted, which is what you think of as a merino wool, really most wools that we would see in the finer wool category, a knitwear, suiting, tailoring, performance, like base layers, that's all going to be a worsted wool. It's the finer kind of normal knit. Or you have woolen fiber, and that's typically a bit coarser, a bit more rustic looking is what I would say. And the woolen and worsted is just the way that the fibers are processed, the way they're combed. So worsted is a way that they're combed so that they line up nicer, they spin tighter. It's a bit more refined, whereas woolen is a lot more rustic. But what we're hoping for is to find something that could perform either way. I'd say from a fashion brand point of view, worsted is more what we need right now, a replacement for the merino products that are out there at a high fashion level especially. That's primarily what we're using. We want to find a different solution for our knitwear, for our tailoring, for our outerwear, and that's primarily worsted yarns. The reason that wool is amazing is its properties. So wool is, I think, probably as far as natural fibers go, has truly unprecedented characteristics naturally built into it. It is naturally odor resistant and antibacterial. So if you sweat in wool, it doesn't smell the same way that a polyester would or even a silk. If you let it air out, it kind of naturally cleans itself. That helps to regulate your body temperature. That's why it's often used as a base layer. It's why you can wear a nice woolen suit in the summer, because it can both keep you warm and breathe. It's a very strong, durable fiber, and it's breathable at the same time. It's biodegradable, which is extremely important because so many of the synthetic alternatives that come up when you're looking at alternatives to wool, such as acrylic, you often see acrylic used in less expensive knitwear, are not biodegradable and in fact shed microfibers when they're washed, which is environmentally a very significant concern. Wool is also wrinkle resistant and resists pilling. Well, I mean, it can. It has to be processed properly, but a well-processed worsted wool is very resistant to pilling. And then, when I was talking to our design team about like what it is really that they think makes wool unique and hard to replace is it doesn't look, shiny and synthetic and cheap. So wool is a bit more expensive. It's a bit more expensive looking. It's a bit finer. It doesn't have that kind of shiny, synthetic, scratchy look and feel to it. That's, I'd say, for us, in the way that we think about wool, the kind of really, really key characteristics. And also that it can be felted. I guess that's another one, is that the synthetic alternatives to wool that we've experimented with over the years, you can't do the same type of processing with them. You can't felt it. You can't get like a nice felted coat out of an acrylic or a polyester. So those are the primary ones that we think would need to be duplicated or replicated. Not to say that you would have to hit every single one, but when you're thinking about how to create an animal-free vegan wool, thinking about those as some of the primary things that we'd be looking for, I'd say that's a good place to start. The things that exist right now that we've trialed, I know PETA's trialed some of these things that try and replace wool. There's quite a bit within the natural plant-based area. None of these fibers have performed quite like wool, but they all have their own unique characteristics. Lyocell, modal, viscose, tencel, bamboo, those are all cellulose fibers, so they come from the cellulose part of a tree, cupro as well, although cupro comes from cotton, but those are can be made environmentally in a very nice way if they're sourced sustainably, if they come from sustainably sourced forests and good chemical processes used to remove the cellulose. But again, they have a very specific characteristic all their own, which is great, but not similar to wool. Cotton is a great material, but again, can be very environmentally damaging when produced in an unsustainable way. Conventional cotton is one of the more toxic crops on the planet. It is uses a huge amount of pesticides to grow. It uses way more pesticides than it does land, and it is just quite water intensive as well. So again, a great, natural fiber, but not quite what we're talking about with wool. I'd say that, out of the fibers that we've listed here, hemp is probably one of the most sustainable. It's a bast fiber, which means it's kind of like a reed, the part that you use, not the cannabis part. And it's extremely sustainable. Hemp is, I think it's gotten a bad rap over the years. It's kind of a hippie fiber, but it's a great fiber for sustainability point of view. It's carbon negative. When we're talking about synthetic fibers, here we go. The fiber that we see most commonly used as a wool alternative is acrylic. And it has some of the properties of wool, but it's quite shiny. It can be a bit scratchy, and like I mentioned before, more and more we're learning that synthetic fibers are causing a large environmental harm in the washing phase. So whenever you wash a garment that has synthetic fibers in it, they shed. And you get these tiny little microfibers that fall off garments that are getting into waterways, into food. We're drinking them, and it's obviously not great because those plastics don't biodegrade. They end up in us, which is extremely unhealthy. So we would like to find an alternative, basically, that doesn't cause us the same problems as the existing fibers that we know. So the things to think about when you're thinking about this challenge is those characteristics that I mentioned before. I think that, thinking about what it is that designers love about wool and consumers, the natural properties that it brings, those are very important. How you produce it. So I very lightly touched on some of the concerns that exist with the fibers that we use right now in fashion. But the production processes that we've relied on in the fashion industry are not particularly environmentally friendly across the board. The industry is waking up, certainly, and at Stella, we're very committed to finding sustainable ways to do production. But when you're thinking about this challenge, it's important to also think about how this material will be produced and to try and do it in a sustainable, responsible way. Because what we don't want to do is create a solution that also is a problem. We want to create something that is considered from beginning to end to be high performance and sustainable. There's been a bit of talk about bolt threads in the other slides. That's someone that we're working with as well at Stella. That yellow dress that you guys saw is a dress that we designed for Bolt that was in MoMA. And I think that they're a great example of a biotech company that is taking on the considerations of not only what the fiber needs to do, how it needs to perform, but looking also at how to produce it in a way that will be sustainable for the long run. Looking at the amount of energy it takes, the amount of water it takes, what feedstocks it takes, how to do that sustainably, and then also importantly how to scale that. So we need to think about, when you're thinking about the challenge, what will be the next step beyond just the creation, just the idea? How would this be scaled? How would this be commercially viable? The life of the material is also very important. I mentioned biodegradability. We don't want to have something that has issues with fibers, and same with, disposable, recyclable. So if it's not hopefully it will be biodegradable, but if it's not biodegradable, you'd want it to be easily recyclable. Back into a fiber is what I would say. Is that the other thing with the industry is that right now a lot of the fibers that we use in fashion are not able to be recycled back into fibers. Only 1% of all textiles globally are recycled back into textiles, so that's something that you want to keep in mind as well when you're thinking about the fiber.
Great, thank you, Claire. And actually I wanted to ask you a question real quick. As you know, the the initial seed for this project was actually planted a couple years ago when PETA, someone at PETA asked me if I could find vegan wool, and I literally scoured the planet, as I know you have done too, and went to all kinds of different fabrics conferences, and I didn't even know these types of conferences existed, but they're quite massive of all these different materials, and I visited yarn factories and talked with people to try and understand more about the process, and what I wanted to ask you about was blending, and you and I spoke about this a little bit, and I'd just like the students to understand, because I actually was thinking the other day that if somebody were to come up with something that, for example, let's say that bamboo is fantastic, or hemp, let's say, you talked very highly of hemp, is wonderful, except it doesn't provide a particular characteristic. Let's say it doesn't provide warmth, for example, but otherwise it's durable and it has a good hand feel, or whatever the characteristics might be. If somebody were to find something, design something that could then be blended with hemp, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit to the students about the concept of blending and how they might take that into consideration as they're doing their creative process.
Absolutely. So I think blended fibers can be a great thing. We often blend in spandex with cotton, for denim. But I think there's a good thing about blending and a bad side about blending, and it's good to have both things in mind. So the way that fibers are often blended is in the yarn stage, where two different types of fiber, synthetic, natural, two naturals, are spun together to create a yarn that is blended. But one of the things that we're very aware of at Stella and try to be conscious about is not blending in too many synthetics specifically. Because when you blend in a synthetic, it makes it so the material is not biodegradable and often not recyclable. So the one thing I would caution, it's not to say it's not feasible, but with recycling and biodegradation, the trying to stay kind of within your fiber type is ideal. So all synthetic, all plastic-based, all polymer-based, or all natural, all plant-based. And I think that's kind of the rule that we're trying to follow more and more when we think about the full life cycle of a product is if we have to blend it, thinking about how you would then recycle it. And having a synthetic with a natural makes it more difficult, and then similarly would make it so it wouldn't biodegrade.
Okay. And I feel like I remember you telling me once, the more things that you blend together, like if you go over, I think it was 3 or 4 different things being blended together, it also causes the yarn to break down faster or something like that. Okay. So there is an opportunity.
Yeah, just the more fibers you blend together, you try and keep it under 3.
Try to keep it
typically, no more than 3 times the fibers, just for a high
But I think that's an interesting thing for them to consider, instead of trying to invent one thing that provides all those characteristics, since there are wonderful natural fibers out there, to maybe, because really since polyester and acrylic in the 1970s or something, it's been a long time since somebody's invented a new fiber, the out of it. So there's some real interesting opportunities there around yarns. So wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
So it's a really exciting industry, that we're having this interest, and I think it's such an amazing thing for us to be a part of a challenge like this, because the fact that there is interest in movement and momentum around new fiber types, like Stephanie said, really haven't had anything new since we had nylon and spandex, and that was a long time ago, and we're all pretty bored with what we have, so we're really excited about the idea of having new fibers to work with that, similar also to what Stephanie said, is we want something that replaces wool, but it doesn't have to be just wool. It's like we're talking about the mushroom leather or what Bolt Threads is doing. It can be better than wool. We want it to at least be, a solution for the things that wool does for us now, but I think the exciting thing about a design challenge like this is it can be so much better as well. You can start to add in characteristics that we currently don't have within the fiber.
That's what we're seeing with the leather industry, like with Tesla and others. Ferrari's also started producing cars with, they call it performance leather. So it's not made of animals, it's completely synthetic, and Mercedes is also using it, and it's just a better material. You know, leather cracks over time. It's just a better material. So there's definitely an opportunity for that. So so wonderful. So now you guys, just one final slide here about some of the experts that we're going to have available, and then we're going to hand it back to Allison to talk. And so just, this is just the beginning, you guys. We're actually, Allison and Daniel and their team is actually lining up even more experts that will be available to you guys. But we just wanted to let you know that if you decide to participate in the Wool Challenge, that everyone on this call, Claire, myself, Lisa, Laura, Daniel, they will all be advisors that will be available to you, and also we're also tapping into other people within our organization. So Claire, for example, is checking in to seeing if some of their their fabrics experts can actually also, put some time into being available to different groups to help. And then I'd mentioned before that Dan, who is the CEO of Bolt Threads, has also offered to get involved. And just in general, across this group, we just have experts. We have access to all kinds of different experts that are going to be available to you guys. And so with that, I think I'll hand it back to Allison. And then actually at the end here, before we wrap things up, I do want to talk about a special announcement we have about something that Stella McCartney's team is going to be offering to the winners of the competition. But we'll save that for the end. So with that, Allison, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and to all the presenters for your wonderful presentations. That's so much helpful information for all of the students that are going to be taking part in this challenge. So before we get into our Q&A section, I do want to say that we do also, in addition to wonderful expert consultants that can help students with their projects, we do also have a resource folder, which all of the instructors should have access to. And so that is full of just a lot of good news articles, scientific studies. PETA put together that kind of nice list that you saw on the vegan wool characteristics that they're looking for. And so all of that is available to all the students that are taking part. Yes, so please ask your instructors. Definitely.
Yes. So I'm going to ask some questions. Feel free to join me again. If you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. I'll get started. So to be honest, it was a little bit of a surprise when PETA came to the Biodesign Challenge and said, "Hey, we want to look at wool." And I guess I'll start with a very basic question, which is, why biotechnology? Why is PETA, why is Stella McCartney looking at biotechnology? And of course, why now? What is different now than, let's say, 10 years?
So this is Stephanie. I'll go ahead and jump in and start, and then if anyone else, Claire or anyone, has anything to add. But I would say now is mainly, again, I talked about it a little bit earlier, very briefly, that a couple years ago, Tracy Ryman, who is one of the top executives at PETA, came to me and she said, "Steph, I know you're always up for the most impossible challenge, so I was wondering, could you find vegan wool?" And I did spend a lot of time going and talking with people, and the reality is there's lots of materials out there that are similar, like they might have the hand feel, they might have different characteristics, but they don't provide every characteristic. And that's, as you saw with what Claire was talking about, wool is a complicated fiber, and so that was the challenge. Like so there are things out there that we can call vegan wool, but they aren't a true replacement. And so I guess it's kind of the timing now. We're kind of lucky in that biotech is becoming such a hot area right now, in that we can tap into that, because everybody I spoke to, whether it was taking current synthetics, I mean, we looked at it from every angle. Could we do blends that nobody else is doing right now that they just haven't thought of? And Claire and I brainstormed, and so that's why so I think Laura had gone to your conference, Dan, a couple years ago, and so anyhow we just kind of connected with you guys, and because I said to somebody, I said the only way we're going to solve this problem is somebody has to invent something, and there's a huge need for it out there. There just literally isn't a good option. Claire, anything you'd like to add?
The reason is that we're seeing it come to us. I mean, I think that until maybe like 3 years ago, biotech hadn't really been applied to the fashion context. I think Bolt Threads, Modern Meadow, there's a few other companies that have really led the charge to marry the two industries together, to make it exciting, make it fun to have the possibility of working with biotech, with science in a new way. And I think what's been really exciting and what's exciting about this is that from our point of view at the brand is that, we get an opportunity to kind of co-create. With the materials that exist on the market right now, they were presented to us by chemical companies for the most part. The DuPonts of the world, those were the people that created the materials we use right now, the synthetic ones. The natural ones obviously come from the planet, it's a little different. But I think that that's really exciting, the opportunity to say, like, these are the characteristics we want. This is the performance we want. We envision a future in fashion where things are more sustainable, things are more ethical. We're not using the land and the world, so abusively in the way that we are right now. And it's just really
cool. I'd love to follow that up with a question to Lisa. What I've seen as a journalist covering biotechnology for many years is that it takes almost a decade, or even more, for a material to go from the laboratory to actual, to the clothing store. And I wonder what investors' appetites are for those kinds of timelines, given that materials are so different.
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you think about it, I'm going to take a similar product. So in the cell agriculture world, Memphis Meats just came out with a meatball last year, and then they came out with duck, and in rapid succession they came out with chicken. And there was a long gap between Memphis Meats making so much progress in such a short period of time, and when the product, the original, if you remember, $300,000 burger made by Mark Post that Sergey Brin sponsored, there was a pretty long timeline, and then you have another company that comes along, and the technology has moved forward so quickly that you can really progress through the different stages relatively fast. So it isn't like it was before where there was such a long wait. What we're seeing is that these companies tend to progress a lot faster because the technology has caught up in a way. And so there are two elements to that. So the technology is faster, and also you have a large group of investors, many of which we shared in this deck, that are mission-based investors. So we have a vested interest to find alternative fibers or find alternative products that will take animals out of the supply chain. And so there is what they call it in the investor world, patient money. So it's capital that knows that there was a longer period of time, including discovery, before these products get to scale and market. But because we have a vested interest in making them happen, we tend to have a longer timeline than the average venture capital investor. So if you combine those two things, I don't know that there's ever been, as it relates to alternative products, a better place to go from the hands of mission-based investors to then the hands of more institutionalized, larger investors once the risky part, in a way, is done, which is the beginning part, usually. And so, it makes it very attractive, very interesting to have a company and to be an entrepreneur now.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Micah. Within the production process, are you focusing also on the sustainability, the workers and their rights, or only on the sustainability with the environment and sheep? So I guess what is the scope of your focus? I think that's the question.
Yeah. I'll kick us off, but then I'll hand it over to Claire because I know she's done a lot of work in this area. But I can tell you, from PETA's standpoint, from the challenge standpoint, we're primarily looking at something that is can help replace wool as far as animal wool. So that's the main focus from the challenge standpoint. But we personally, we don't just believe in animal rights, we also believe in human rights and fair conditions for workers. So never would we want to support some type of process that was going to end up creating horrific working conditions. And fortunately, in most situations like leather and such, the leather industry is just notorious for, I forget the statistic off the top of my head, but the amount of people who end up with cancer around leather factories is like 80 times higher than in other areas, and the conditions for the workers are just horrible. So normally when you're working with a live animal, that is not a pleasant process. So normally being able to go towards something that can be created in a lab and produced in a factory is much better for the workers. But I'll let Claire talk about some of the processes that Stella looks at when they're evaluating their vendors.
Absolutely, and I think it's important, like Stephanie said, that for this challenge, that's not in scope because, well, I guess we shouldn't say it's not in scope, but we assume that because you don't have a limited amount of time, and we won't be looking at factory conditions. Right. It's not necessarily the thing that we're asking for here. But from our point of view, absolutely, we look at that. I mean, we wouldn't ever consider working with a company or on a project or with a supplier that didn't meet our standards environmentally and ethically. That's absolutely across the board. We believe in that. We have people in my team dedicated fully to human rights, working on that to make sure that all of our partners, all of our factories, as far as we can get down into the raw materials, even trying to look at things like cotton farming, which is historically very unethical when you look at human rights. All of that is being done and maintained with a level of integrity. And I think that, when you start thinking about scaling, I think that's when you start to think about making sure that human rights is protected. When you start thinking about building a factory and bringing people in and sourcing your raw materials, if it's a blended or if you need a feedstock that's plant-based, I think that's when you start thinking about the ethics. And I think it's great to have that in your mind, but probably not the primary focus at this stage. But anything you use, anything you're using anytime, humans touched it. There's no way to avoid that. So if it's a synthetic, if it's hemp, if it's cotton, if it's your makeup, anything has humans involved. So it's always good to keep it in mind.
Wonderful. And yes, and that's a wonderful question that I think applies to the entire challenge, which we, ask students to really think holistically about the life cycle of the product and who gets to use it and who doesn't, and the impact, not only on the environment but human health. So yes, that kind of fits very well in with the rest of the competition. So we have one more question that came in, well actually two more. Our next one says, what are the most fundamental properties of wool that we need to focus on to develop the new?
Yeah, and I was going to go back, I'm moving our slide real quick back to the vegan wool characteristics, which we all went round and round on. I think that there were about 30 different characteristics that wool has. Some of them were not exactly high priority, such as is not flammable, which we decided wasn't something we needed at the top of the list. But so I don't know, Claire. This is tough. It's tough to say. I mean, I know the neutralizing of the odor and the warmth of the body temperature and the moisture are some of the ones I heard the most when I spoke to companies. They talked about antimicrobial, anti-stink, stays warm or regulates temperature, and wicks moisture. That's kind of what people would always say, those top things to me. But what would you say? Are there, I know obviously this is a challenge. It's just one semester that these students have, so we're not exactly expecting them to start rolling things off an assembly line by the end of the semester. But if they had to focus on, let's say, 4 or 5 of these, what would you say are the ones that are the most key?
I think the ones that you mentioned are great.
Okay.
Yeah. The ones that you mentioned, I think, are, very accurate. I think the odor regulation is a big one. I think the fact that, especially when you compare it to the synthetic alternatives that are currently available on the market, nobody likes the way they smell when they wear polyester, so very nice. And I think the regulating body temperature, and within that, we mean that it's both, keeps you warm, keeps you cool. So that kind of fits in with breathable as well. And that really is, because it's a hollow fiber, it just has a very specific property that way. And I do think that the durability and strength of the material, that quality is also very important, because that durability, that strength, is why it doesn't wrinkle and why it doesn't pill and why it doesn't look synthetic. That it is a stronger fiber kind of helps
Right.
start to think about those things. And then I would also call out biodegradable. You know, it's what you guys, Allison and Dan, were saying, is you're looking at the whole life cycle of a material, and you want something that, you know, can hopefully enter the earth again, you know, in a non-harmful way. So thinking about, you know, whatever goes into making this, that can go back and become soil again, you know, become part of the carbon cycle, be a biological nutrient in that way. I think those are very important.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you made about by being strong, it then helps with some of the, you know, it kind of naturally provides some of those other characteristics of wrinkling and pilling, and that's interesting. And I should mention real quick to the students, one of the areas that I looked at when we were trying to find something is there are companies out there that are inventing performance fibers. So they're, you know, big for people who are making like that first layer, they call it, you know, for like snowboarding or skiing, outdoor activities. They're actually have, I don't know if you would say it's done in a lab, I don't know what the term would be, but they're creating hollow fiber, hollow yarn. You know, so it's a fiber that has a hollow core inside of it that helps with what Claire was talking about with regulating the body temperature, and how that differs with wool, I really can't tell you, and I'm hoping we'll have some fiber experts for you available during the challenge. But you know, that'd be something that you could look at, like how they did that and how they're creating those hollow fiber yarns. So, because that's, again, it's providing some of it, but when I took it to Claire and her team, it just wasn't providing the hand feel that they were looking for, you know, that talks here about doesn't look synthetic, it wasn't providing. And I remember there was also one company I came across at a conference that was making yarn out of coffee grounds, which I thought was really fascinating. They were actually in partnership with Starbucks. They pick up all the coffee grounds they're going to throw out anyhow, and then they're taking them to these factories in Asia, and they're spinning it into yarn, which immediately, for some reason, I thought to myself, well, surely that yarn would have the hand feel of wool, right? Like, I don't know why coffee grounds in my head just seem like they'd be very scratchy the way that wool is. But yeah, so there's just all kinds of cool things that people are doing. I'll hand it back to you guys. That Stella McCartney is graciously going to offer a 2-week works, 1 to 2 weeks, we're still finalizing the details, work shadow program in their world headquarters in London for the student group that wins the prize. So for not just one student, for the entire group. So whoever wins the animal-free wool prize will have the opportunity and be invited to come to London and spend 1 to 2 weeks work shadowing various people in the Stella McCartney office, which I think will just be an amazing opportunity for you guys to meet with Claire and talk about what she's doing, and we might be lining up some other surprises for you guys. They're going to come work shadow with you too, right, Lisa? And
That's amazing.
we can all meet them there. So yeah, so I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity for that group, and I know that they'll be really thrilled to have you guys there. Stella McCartney's team is so excited to see people working on this issue and for somebody to come up with a solution. And I can guarantee, you know, whatever team, if you guys, whether you win the prize or whatever happens, but anybody who forges forward and solves this problem, there's definitely a market for your materials out there. So we look forward to working with anyone who decides to join us. So thank you all for being here today. Dan and Allison, I'll hand it back to you guys.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I think that was really informative and wonderful. I just want to reiterate that all the experts that you heard today will try to make themselves available to you as experts as you work on this project. So not only do you get the opportunity, which sounds awesome, to go spend some time shadowing folks at Stella McCartney, you also have the opportunity that as you work on your projects, you'll have some of the top experts really out there who are thinking about these issues. So do not be intimidated. We're here to help, and we're really excited to see your projects. So go forth. We'll see you in June.